Welcome everybody. Take your seats if you can. We're going to start the first or the morning plenary, looking at both Eastern Partnership and Enlargement from the context of the Hungarian and Polish presidencies, but obviously broader because the presidencies are obviously not the only player in the EU, not to mention the other neighbouring countries, but also to look forward to future presidencies. Just to briefly say, last year we had a PASOS event in Berlin, and this year in Warsaw, and it's actually been very good cooperation with Institute of Public Affairs, with Andrzej, also his colleague Agnieszka Lada, because both from the program point of view, the logistics, and I think it's very important that there's a kind of an active think tank as a host organisation that can really strengthen both the program and I hope the local participation in the organisation. So thanks to IPA for that. In terms of enlargement in Eastern Partnership, it might be worth just mentioning a few of the things which have clearly happened during the Polish presidency. Some outside its control, perhaps like the Tymoshenko trial, but also, of course, other opposition figures in Ukraine. Likewise, as was mentioned, the sentencing yesterday of Balázs for 4.5 years, which, of course, is quite a poignant point here because of the bank account information which was released from here, from Poland. So there's a lot of developments like that. Of course, there was the Eastern Partnership Summit in Warsaw, and perhaps the review from Commissioner Fuller with more is more, and of course the deep democracy concept, which is quite difficult to tackle when you look at the events in Belarus. But again, as came up with the question in the first session, the mixed messages coming from the EU. And this, I think, is a challenge in terms of, can the EU really have a long-term strategic approach given the different perspectives, unfortunately, of business interests of EU members? In terms of enlargement, there has certainly been some important developments. In October, Serbia was given candidacy status. I think in Montenegro, accession negotiations actually started, and of course, the process has been completed with Croatia. So there are a lot of developments, and we have a panel which can address that, looking both at Polish and Hungarian presidencies. We also have a policy brief looking at particularly cross-border cooperation, specially commissioned for the conference. And of course we also have representatives from both Serbia and Ukraine, so we actually have the in-country experience. So we're not just talking about the EU side, which I think is very important. So I will kick off with what we're hoping to do is to have 10 or 12 minutes from each speaker, because we have a very informed audience, which is what is always great about the PASOS events, because so many think tanks engaged. So we'll try and keep a good chunk of time for debate. So with that, I will ask Péter Balázs to start, who's of course been both in the shoes of a foreign minister and of course the very first commissioner for Hungary. So he has also the fresh knowledge of what happened, of course, under the Hungarian presidency. Péter, thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Starting with the Eastern Partnership, the second summit meeting was due in the Hungarian presidency in the first half of this year, and it didn't take place in Budapest. Why? There are several reasons, maybe one on the internal side, one on the external side. On the internal side, that the Prime Minister of Hungary didn't like the EU presidency at all. The presidency was banned from the capital, shifted to a wonderful castle in Gödöllő, which used to belong to Kaiser in Sissi in the Habsburg times. And when I asked delegates in Brussels returning from Hungary, they said that we were somewhere in the nowhere in a wonderful park, in a wonderful castle, but we were somehow smuggled out from Budapest because the Prime Minister said that no traffic jams during the presidency. This was the message that out from Budapest. One of the victims was the Eastern Partnership. On the first occasion when some coordination problems occurred with OECD and other meetings, then we made it a friendly gift to the Polish presidency immediately. Then there was an external political reason, which is more serious than the first one, is that supposedly the Prime Minister, who has a fantastic political instinct, could feel that this wouldn't be a fantastic success of the presidency. And he gave it over. I had the honor to be present in Prague 2 years ago. I used to be the foreign minister of my country. And we were full with hopes and expectations in spite of the half-hearted presence of the EU, because new member states, Germany and few others, were there at the highest level, but I would say the western half of the EU was not really involved with leading politicians. Today, 2 years after this glorious start, we can see that the political motivation is maybe rather weak on both sides. EU is attracted by the Arab Spring, Middle East, the Eurozone crisis. We could see yesterday the very promising meeting of Germany, France and Italy at the highest level, starting to speak seriously about the treaty modification. It would take the next year, 2012, we'll be busy with mostly with internal things, and on the external side, mainly what is unavoidable to deal with. In the Eastern partners, we can see some of them breaching EU norms, like democracy in Belarus, or using jurisdiction for political reasons in Ukraine. We can see fundamental problems with internal political stabilization, which has its impact on foreign policy orientations, which is fluctuating from government to government, so it's not a straight line towards the EU. I think that the summit in Warsaw was a success because under the given circumstances, Polish diplomacy gave a good answer to the things. Of course, there are some points on the reverse side, no joint statement on Belarus, or instead of a more for more approach, it made the impression of a less for less outcome. If we are critical to ourselves on the EU side, I would say that we are repeating our usual mistakes. We are very good at long-term dreams and less good at short-term problem solving. Sometimes we are mixing up the two. Textbook example is the Lisbon strategy, an immediate delay in competitiveness and a long-term answer becoming the most competitive knowledge-based economy, which was a bad mixture of the two. We like to put emphasis on regions, mainly in the neighborhood. At the same time, we do not really feel whether there is sufficient cohesion in that region. Anyhow, Eastern Partnership is definitely better than the most unfortunate neighborhood policy, which tried to put in one sack Tunisia and Belarus, all the neighbors. It was an immediate reaction by 2004, not a very successful approach, because that neighborhood is consisting of several sub-regions. Even the Eastern Partnership is consisting obviously of two sub-regions that would deserve a highly differentiated approach based on the same fundamental norms. But when it comes to implementation, it should be more specific. We like to repeat joint ownership. At the same time, we are dictating very frequently our conditions. I do not miss any occasion to repeat my feelings about the name of the work program, Eastern
Partnership. What is the meaning of Eastern here? Who is the Eastern partner of Ukraine? And for them, we are Western partners, if I know well German. So it should have been something different, maybe European partnership. We are applying strong conditionality and promising weak rewards. There is an obvious imbalance between the two sides. And I wonder if totally ignoring Russia is a good strategy. Russia is there anyhow, whether we like or not, behind the Eastern partners. And that is a latent conflict. If we hide that conflict, it wouldn't be solved. For Russia, this is the needed approach. For us, this is the Eastern Partnership. It's a conflicting approach to the two, pushing our neighbors towards a choice. We should help them to find a good solution. Good solution would be obviously a Western partnership for them. I think that we should do more efforts, and these were the hopes back in Prague that maybe in 2 years there would be a fantastic content of the Eastern Partnership. There are obvious possibilities in trade, in investment, in the more free circulation of workforce, in extending Tarasyuk networks of not only of energy but also of transport and environment, and to make use of a new idea of the EU macro-regional strategies. The Baltic Sea strategy is already there. The Danube strategy is already there. There could be something similar with the Black Sea region. And not only on waterways or connecting waters, but on mainland there are also other opportunities. The well-known enclave of Kaliningrad. We shouldn't lose our motivation to find a good solution, and there is one more which is very obvious, the Transcarpathian territory of Ukraine, surrounded by 4 EU members in a very narrow circle, which would be an ideal place for investments and transport connections between the two regions. Finally, I think that we should find a way somehow to get out what we can call the membership trap. Just dreaming only one final objective, which is not realistic for the time being, the EU could give good answers to 2 candidates only. Croatia is in the pipeline with a clear perspective of joining on the 1st of July 2013, which is good news, and Iceland is negotiating. If the Hungarian presidency could do something for enlargement, this was excellent expert work on achieving the negotiations with Croatia. On the 30th of June, coming to the final end of agreements, not on paper, but in the form of political agreements, but it's there. What the Hungarian presidency missed, in my view, was an immediate reaction to the gesture of Serbia extraditing Ratko Mladic, which was quite an achievement, and there should have been an initiative, an immediate positive answer on behalf of the EU, initiated by the presidency. However, the EU is moving in that direction. At the same time, we are not able to give valid answers to 2 other partners, one single, one is a group. The single partner is Turkey. Turkey is a challenge. Turkey is quite unusual a candidate for the EU. We cannot compare it with anybody in the past. Turkey is perhaps too big for the EU, but not an average European. Still European and important. So we would need a lot of imagination to solve that enigma. The group is the Western Balkans. It is maybe too small for the EU and divided into very small units. The whole Western Balkans has a population of that of Romania, divided into 7 states. Now, how to deal with that area of unfinished state building, which is maybe the biggest challenge here. We are working in Central European University now on a project called EU 36. We have just taken the enlargement report of Stefan Füle, and we have taken the list of countries that are named by name in that report, altogether 9 countries, and we have added them to the existing 27. This brings us to EU 36. How would EU 36 look? For the 4 freedoms, for the budget, for defense, for the institutions, for everything. And we have constructed a multinational project from that. All that would be for the next rather long period, because the next milestone of the EU is very near. This is 2013-14. 13 for the next enlargement, 14 for a new European Commission and the new European Parliament, for implementing some of the remaining provisions of the Lisbon Treaty, double majority voting, and then the reduction of the number of commissioners by that time, and the new budget. Anyhow, we have busy 3 years ahead, and then opening a period which would go until the next milestones around 19 and 20. So we should start to plan that coming period right now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Péter. I think you brought up both Turkey and Russia, and I know that that will be a discussion also among the civil society groups in Poznan, which is also one of the events supported by the Polish presidency, the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum. And I think it would also be good to hear, perhaps from the Polish presidency side, how it is possible to keep on the agenda issues such as the Eastern Partnership, but also enlargement, competing with the Euro crisis, which is taking all the headlines and so much time at the Brussels level, but of course also the fact that shifting priorities with the Arab Spring, but also the trade relations, the increasing trade with Asia, for instance, shifting priority, and to what extent it is possible to keep on the agenda, but not just for Poland, but also looking for the future. For the Danish presidency, I think for Poland it's easier to keep Ukraine and Belarus on the agenda than it is, for instance, for Western European presidents. So we have Andrzej Cieszkowski, Plenipotentiary for the Eastern Partnership, and the Polish Foreign Minister.
Very much. I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this great event and the creation of the possibility to discuss these very important questions with us, and I would like to thank for inviting me to share with you with some thoughts on Eastern Partnership. Unfortunately, I'm not ready to discuss the enlargement process because I'm not responsible for this, but I think that we took this responsibility from the Hungarian presidency, and we push this item forward. I will concentrate in my presentation on the main idea I have. It is that our role as an advocate of integration process of Eastern partners with the European Union is to present, to prepare an offer and instruments, and try to convince our Eastern partners to engage and to meet the criteria. The idea is that Eastern Partnership, or the whole EU Eastern policy, is not a one-way street. It should be two-way street, and it depends not only on EU political will. It depends on the political will in the Eastern Partnership countries. You perfectly know that the Eastern Partnership originally Polish-Swedish initiative. Now it is a part of EU foreign policy, and I think that it is one of the priority in the EU foreign policy. I think that enlargement process is the main one, if we look back, it was very successful for decades in the EU policy, and neighborhood policy is the second priority, and not only southern but eastern as well. I think that I agree that Warsaw summit was a success because it confirmed that it is in the interest of the European Union and our Eastern friends to create conditions for political and economic integration process. EU is aiming at supporting transformation in partner countries by strengthening democracy, freedoms, civil society, stimulating their economic development and enhancing their administrative capacities. EU is always working on the regional basis in the external affairs, not country basis. So it helped all the countries, including Ukraine, in their bilateral agenda with the European Union. And I think that value of Eastern Partnership is of double nature. Firstly, it pushed forward bilateral relations with partner countries. And secondly, it created a framework for multilateral relations. Summit declaration, Warsaw Summit declaration, I think expands its ambitious offer, and it is our role to prepare this offer. And the offer should be ready to be used by all the 6 countries. And I always have the example of Moldova, that the country was the most skeptical country in the Eastern Partnership in 2009. If you remember, the president of Moldova did not come to Prague. And after the political changes in the country, it has become the most engaged one. So my idea is that we should stick to the idea that the offer should be open to all the 6. And the second idea is that development of cooperation should depend more on how partner countries respond to this offer. And the Warsaw Summit confirmed the more for more principle, which foresees increased EU support for partners that are most engaged in cooperation with the EU. And it is to be applied to all the neighbors, not only Eastern but Southern as well. My new idea is that we should have at our disposal resources to be used to implement it, and we could think of not allocating the funds, all the funds, to specific bilateral envelopes, and keep some funds aside so that they could be used in line with the more for more principle. Ukraine is the most advanced partner, and I think that the association agreement could be finalized only provided that the Ukrainian authorities clearly demonstrate their attachment to the principles of democracy and rule of law, in particular by their approach to political opposition. You know that DCFTA negotiations are already concluded, meaning that the most difficult part of the agreement is completed. And I remember that most of experts, European and Ukrainian, thought it was a mission impossible. But today we know that the economic side of the agreement is completed. So the most difficult is done. So this is an argument that two sides see the future in the process of deep economic integration. That's the question to be decided is political one. You know what is the nature of this question. I think that Moldova and Georgia are also interested in speeding up the pace on the path to closer political association and economic integration. And I hope that the launch of negotiations on DCFTA with those countries by the end of this year would clearly signalize that the EU's will to deepen cooperation with those countries. And again, it depends on this country's track in implementing their reforms, and we are still waiting for the last news from Moldova on the package of laws needed to start negotiations on this issue. And you know that a few years ago it was not possible to even think on association agreements with the Caucasian countries. Now it is the fact. We are negotiating association agreements with Georgia, with Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And of course, like more for more, or the regatta system, always used by European Union. Some countries will go faster. Some countries will not. Visa-free travel, I think, is one of the most important questions. And we've managed to agree at the summit in Warsaw that visa-free regime should be granted to all the countries, to all the citizens of those countries of Eastern Partnership, if the countries meet criteria, and not as a long-term goal anymore. That I think is really a success to make it the function of the criteria, not as a long-term goal. Eastern Partnership is not limited to intergovernmental relations, and we have Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. I hope that it will be successful in cooperation between parliamentarians from the European Parliament and parliaments from the Eastern partners, the Civil Society Forum, the Conference on Regional and Local Authorities, as well as Business Forum launched in Sopot on the margins of the summit. So Eastern Partnership has opened for other participants. On Monday we will have Civil Society Forum Plenary in Poznan, and I think that we will discuss widely. establishing the European Endowment for Democracy and Civil Society facility, as envisaged in the Warsaw Summit Declaration, I think will significantly strengthen civil society activity of Eastern European countries. And one point more, I think, important, again, as a role of Poland as an advocate and active participant of the process, is to create instruments. And with the Eastern Partnership, we've pushed financial institutions to be active in Eastern Partner countries. Maybe you remember that 4 or 5 years ago, European Investment Bank was present only in Russia. That was 100% allocations in Russia. Now the situation is different. 2/3 of allocations of European Investment Bank go to 5 Eastern Partnership countries. Belarus is not included. 1/3 is going to be used in Russia. Second, there is a Eastern Partnership facility created by the bank with the budget of 1.5 billion euros. That's a huge money to be used on investments. The problem is that it can be used only if investment conditions in the Eastern Partners are favorable, and fighting corruption is effective. The next example, using of neighborhood investment facility, maybe you know that with the EU money, using 170 million euros, we've leveraged the value of investment in Eastern Partner countries to more than 3 billion euros. And majority of the projects, there are 30 projects, are implemented in Moldova and Georgia, and only a few in Ukraine. That is a surprise, but I think that it is the question of two-way street. We prepare the instruments, and there is a great potential to have the assistance of the EU in Ukraine, and I hope it will be used. And the last one, we've identified some problems in the Eastern Partners to prepare investment projects. So we've created trust fund, Eastern Partnership Technical Assistance Trust Fund, and Poland put 1 million euros to the trust fund, and other countries, Sweden, Austria, and others, put another money to the trust fund to help with technical preparations of the projects. Hope in the future it will work. And the last point, maybe you've identified as a Polish initiative. We've pushed forward the sectorial cooperation with the Eastern Partners. We've organized about 20 meetings of sectorial cooperation during our presidency. And it is because of the Treaty of Lisbon, especially because you know that foreign affairs is in the competences mainly of the External Action Service, but all the sectors are in the hands of sectorial councils led by the presidency. So we've engaged our ministries, line ministries, to be active in the Eastern European agenda, and they were really helpful in this endeavor. And we've had meetings on economy, on agriculture, on transport, customs, and others. And I hope that it will be taken by the future presidency and External Action Service in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. I think one issue on the sectoral approaches is the participation of civil society, particularly obviously think tanks being an important policy relevant actor in the thematic platforms. And there was the working group 1 meeting last week, and I know Belarus is still holding out, isn't it, against full participation of civil society in the thematic platform meeting. We now have we talked about the civil society facility and the question of the different types of engagement of civil society in fact, it's cross-border cooperation initiatives, which Andrzej Demidov will now talk about, and he has the paper if anybody is interested. There were some copies out there. Andrzej.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present the modest results of our small policy paper, which was written by me and my colleague, who unfortunately can't be here with us, Sarah Svensson. And to basically touch upon once again the issue of civil society participation, not exclusively civil society participation, but and local governments as well. So basically, our task for this policy brief was to look more closely at the state of implementation of the European neighbourhood policy, which is a highly relevant issue at the moment in the European Union as well, and very relevant for both Hungarian and Polish presidencies. So, but we, as being like most academicians, we just try to distance ourselves from the very beginning from paying too much attention to what we have called sensitive political issues, such as democracy building, institution building, visa regimes, and other types of regimes. But you can never get away with highly sensitive political issues in the end. And we just tried to look more closely at the sort of nitty-gritty of the implementation of one particular component of European neighbourhood policy, which is cross-border cooperation. We know that at the moment it's being implemented via 13 programs between the European Union member states and neighbouring countries. And more specifically, we tried to look at how widely and how actively basically local actors, namely civil society organizations and local governments, are involved in implementation of those programs, because apparently the European Commission and the European Union approach is the approach of we would call it local bottom-up approach, when cross-border cooperation is something that should be initiated from the bottom up and not imposed in a top-down manner. And we were literally puzzled interested about how actively they involved, like how they contribute, whether the cross-border component of European neighbourhood policy delivers what it's intended to deliver. And our basically endeavour started with looking through the minutes of the European Parliament debates on the stage of implementation of the cross-border cooperation, which took place in the summer 2011, and which was basically heavily criticised by Hungarian and Polish members of the European Parliament for its inability to deliver expected results. So, and starting from this, we basically got down to CBC programs. Well, unfortunately, due to time constraints, I'm not able to look through the whole of the paper, but I'm just going to raise a couple of important issues that we found very relevant in terms of our present discussion as well. So basically, what we have identified is by looking at the project supported for the CBC component in the European neighbourhood policy. What we have identified was sort of constant rhetorical confusion emanating both from the European Commission and on the grounds about what this local approach means, what actually local ownership means, what is it meant to deliver, and who is considered to be the local actor, which is actually, when put in a highly problematic context of the neighbouring countries, especially in some countries like where issues of civil society and local governments are extremely sensitive and widely discussed. When put in that context, this rhetorical confusion is not actually is unlikely to contribute to greater efficiency of the CBC programs. And what we meant by this was when we were looking at the policy documents of the European Commission, and when we were looking at the cross-border operational programs approved by the European Commission, we immediately found out a great confusion about what is meant by local actor. In some documents, especially in the Commission's documents, when the terms local, regional actors are used interchangeably, or in the policy in the documents of the operational programs, when local actor is being interpreted in a very interesting manner in the neighboring countries. When, for example, in one operational program, local government is considered to be civil society, and civil society organizations, if we're speaking about local actors, civil society organizations are not considered to be local actors. So, well, basically, our overall conclusion was that this discursive and rhetorical confusion was sort of hindering the implementation. While this is a very important issue because the Commission insists on involvement of local actors at both the programming level, when those programs are elaborated and the priorities are defined, actually, and implementation level, when basically the projects should be selected, monitored and evaluated by afterwards. So the next basic, and excuse me, when we're speaking about a particular priority, when, like for example, people-to-people contacts, which is the fourth main objective of the cross-border component, this comes as highly problematic because how can we be speaking about people-to-people contacts if there's no basically agreement because the European Commission and the neighboring implementing countries about who is going to contribute to those people-to-people contacts. Well, basically, and getting actually to civil society organizations, we found again quite much confusion about what is meant by civil society organizations, and our overall impression was that due to this imprecision, the trend that can be found on the ground is marginalization of local governments and civil society organizations as potential contributors to cross-border collaboration, both at the programming level and at the implementation level, which is a very sad sign given that there's a strong intellectual argument behind involvement of local actors. We simply looked at the supported projects, and we simply looked at the partners of those projects. And although cross-border cooperation programs are far from being implemented, far from being finished, because the programming period is still going on. But we have the impression that basically what was meant to be a local ownership and local approach in some cases turned into a highly centralized top-down regional approach, especially in some countries where, like Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And this is well, I shouldn't be saying that this is sad because civil society organizations and local governments, if they are considered as transmitters of democratic values and European values, then there's a great room for improvement, big room for improvement on the part of both the European Commission and countries who could push forward for better implementation of this idea of involvement. Well, and just to cut the long story short, we came up with a couple of policy recommendations on the basis of our, unfortunately, not very deep analysis. We just have scratched the surface. And besides basically changing the focus of the cross-border cooperation program, which is at this very moment is more tilted towards regional rather than local cross-border cooperation. Besides doing something about over-bureaucratization of the CBC programs, which is very often a point for particular complaints on the part of the civil society organizations and local governments, who are quite weak, both financially and in terms of other capacities in the neighboring countries. We would also emphasize that maybe the potential of already existing institutions, such as Euroregions, or programs that have been in place for quite a long time, such as the LEADER program, the potential of those institutions could be used more actively to ensure and enhance meaningful participation of local actors. Because what we observe at the moment is sort of prioritization of new structures which came along with the European neighborhood policy over something that already existed on the ground, and sort of neglect of those institutions, which could be very, very helpful in activating participation of local actors. Just to conclude briefly, we see that there's sort of a big room for further improvement of the cross-border component of the European neighborhood policy, given that the present programming period is coming to an end, and given that the discussions about the next programming period are about to start very, very soon. So I should finish, I think, at this very point. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I did just check on my information was now out of date. Last week, apparently Belarus dropped their opposition to the permanent participant status of civil society in the thematic groups, which is very good news. We've been asking for this for a long time. So on the one hand, there's the bad news yesterday about the sentencing of Alexei, but obviously sometimes, you know, the political will comes in different forms, and I think that's part of the question, I think, for both of our next panelists. Not just on the EU side, because with enlargement fatigue, we do at least see some good news that Serbia is now a candidate state. Even the news that talks look on the agenda for visa liberalization, also for Kosovo, which has been a big problem because of the lack of recognition of Kosovo by all EU member states. Jelena Milić from Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies in Serbia. Also, what is the political will to stay motivated given the long process of enlargement, and what would be really the priorities for reform and even for EU external assistance to Serbia now?
Thank you. Thank you, dear organizers, and you, Mr. Lovett, for... is it better now? Do you hear me? I don't know. Do you hear me? Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present my view on challenges that Serbia is facing on its EU path, and to suggest some rather general recommendations, mostly about the future involvement, the manner of future involvement of the EU in Serbia, that I hope can be applicable for the rest of the Western Balkans countries as well. I'm not going to go in detail about the newly emerging circumstances like the crisis and the Eurozone drama, although I suppose that they will affect European enlargement policy one way or another, simply because the time constraints, but also because the recommendations that I will give today are rather along better usage of the existing tools and policies that EU has at hand, and better coordination with the United States and NATO in dealing with Western Balkans. I hope you are not going to hold it against me for continuing my address today by reading my written remarks. Bearing in mind the forthcoming EU Council decision on Serbian candidate status bid and other Western Balkans related issues that is going to happen under the Polish presidency, and the fact that these decisions are crucial to Serbia and others in the region too, I would like to use this extraordinary opportunity for me to present my view of the state of the affairs in my country today in front of you, and to provide some arguments for my recommendations as clearly as possible. And I hope the moderator is not going to take it against me if I breach the time constraints a little bit. Let me briefly give you a short breakdown of most important new moments in Serbia-EU relations. The arrests of Ratko Mladic and Goran Hadžić, two remaining ICTY fugitives that occurred in spring this year, are good news in many respects, as well as being an opportunity for Serbia to continue to put its overall security sector, judiciary, army, police, intelligence agencies, customs, private security sector in order. So far, Serbia has also adopted almost all laws indicated in the year 2010 EU Commission Progress Report. The EU Commission gave in October its positive opinion on Serbian candidate status bid, and the Council will announce its decision on December 9th this year. This pending decision depends mostly on three conditions, all relate to Serbia-Kosovo relation. First one is continuation of dialogue with Kosovo, then the implementation of already agreed matters and Serbian attitude towards the EULEX mission in Kosovo, namely removal of roadblocks in North Kosovo that prevent EULEX staff to work in accordance with EULEX mandate. This becomes more and more of the challenge as official Belgrade relation with Northern Kosovo leaders is deteriorating. Good news is that some political parties and civil society organizations, led by Liberal Democratic Party, have only recently set up a movement, Radical Change, whose main goals are to defend Serbian EU perspective and to contribute to it, as well to facilitate the change of the current official policy towards Kosovo. Even better news is that of this morning, the LDP and the Radical Change movement are officially the third strongest political actor in Serbia. Now I would like to draw your attention to four interrelated areas that the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies closely follows. We think that they have deserved more consideration during the deliberative period, and we hope that they will be both in focus of Serbia and the EU in the forthcoming period. Not only Kosovo-related issues, but these issues too should be among those facts that the EU will present as conditions that need improvement prior to its eventual decision to grant Serbia a date for beginning of negotiation if it grants Serbia a candidate status in the first place. These topics should be a part of the forthcoming election campaign too, and the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies is working hard to that end. So these four mentioned areas are: first, Serbian authorities' willingness and capability to investigate, disclose, and prosecute all those who have been supporting Ratko Mladic and other ICTY fugitives for so long, by what means they have done so and at what cost, as a precondition for more comprehensive security sector reform as well. Second, the level of Serbian authorities' commitment to regional reconciliation as demonstrated by their actual policies and behavior on the ground. Third, the readiness of Serbian authorities to comprehensively close the gaps in Serbian security sector reform, both structurally and in its personnel, and to continue to improve democratic control over the sector. Fourth, the Serbian government's willingness to change its policies towards Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. A need for a comprehensive EU approach and more active NATO role in evaluation and assistance to Serbia to complete its security sector reform, judiciary included, is going to be a main topic of my presentation today. Without that reform, all other reform attempts are severely impeded. Oddly enough, this program of reform is rarely mentioned in the context of Serbian EU integration. I deeply believe that current gaps in security sector reform seriously affect other internal policies in Serbia and its foreign orientation and relations. Unfortunately, the current EU approach to this subject is ad hoc, occasionally self-contradictory, and sometimes based on wishful thinking. Unfortunately, the role of the United States in NATO in this area in Serbia can be subject of another long presentation of mine without much better conclusions either. I will not go into details on other important fields related to Serbian progress towards the EU, as I find the European Commission progress reports very well present the topics they cover. This is why I recommend the above-mentioned comprehensive EU approach for overall security sector reform as well. The EU has at its disposal tools to assume this approach. By combining its common foreign security and defense policy and the enlargement policy, the EU can better connect its technical with political conditions and make it easier for Serbia and other countries of the Western Balkans to understand and meet them. Belgrade's current policies, including those towards Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region, are severely affected by three problems with the current state of affairs in the country's security sector. The decision-making process on crucial issues is still made outside the legal institutions, that just serve to give them democratic cover-up. The decision-making process, if it occurs within the institutions, is often influenced by persons still employed in them who are compromised by their activities during the 90s and afterwards. An overall problem is a lack of harmonization of legislation throughout the sector and poor law enforcement in Serbia in general. In its conclusion, the European Commission Progress Report for Serbia for year 2010 merely states, overall, there was further progress towards completing the legislation providing a civilian oversight of security forces and implementing constitutionally granted rights. However, civilian oversight, including the work of the relevant parliamentary committee, needs to be reinforced. In its year 2011 analytical report, the European Commission has finally acknowledged the fact that Serbia is among very rare states which security agencies have mandate to dwell in criminal police investigations. The EU, of course, through the Commission's annual progress reports, covers many segments of security sector reform, such as the reform of judiciary and the role of parliament in democratic oversight. It also covers many aspects through the questionnaire it prepares for an applicant country. Nevertheless, in the case of Serbia, it should map out and analyze the achievements of the security sector reform process overall. Based on these findings, the EU should shape and present its expectations regarding the future steps that Serbia should undertake, as it does in the other fields of primarily concern such as the fight against corruption and organized crime. Without this additional effort, the EU risks significantly undermining all material and political support provided to Serbia and to the region to date. Action on these above-mentioned fronts would finally create an environment in which the Serbian security sector can undergo thorough and comprehensive reform. It is my deep conviction that these issues constitute a knot that genuine pro-EU forces in Serbia cannot untangle without much stronger EU support and involvement, with clear requirements and rewards for achieving them. The EU has demonstrated its capacities to make the enlargement process tailor-made, recognizing the specific circumstances of the applicant countries, by example, including full cooperation with the ICTY for Western Balkans countries, while maintaining its own standards. A similar logic should be applied in the case of Serbia and the need for security sector reform. The incompleteness of this process related to domestic oversight of military security and intelligence agency predominantly, and of regulation in defense industry exports that is not in compliance with the EU expectations and recommendations, is confirmed by the Serbian government itself in its answers to the EU questionnaire. There are two possible explanations for Serbia's failure to push for more comprehensive security sector reform and to reinforce mentioned oversight by itself. First potential argument or circumstances is that Serbian authorities wish to do it but do not control the full security apparatus. Or the second argument is that they wish to impose control but not to reform the sector, and are therefore acting to strengthen informal political parties' instruments of control, making unacceptable compromises along the road. Serbian policy towards Kosovo that overarches and dictates the scope of all other policies also significantly reduces Serbian capacity to complete security sector reform on its own. The lack of successful judiciary reform has an ongoing impact on the security sector, which has been rarely, unfortunately, analyzed. While cooperation with the ICTY and domestic prosecution for war crimes have often been grudging and slow in coming, they have contributed significantly to the security sector reform. ICTY cooperation, which resulted in transfer of some active staff as well as those retired but well connected and still influential in the ICTY detention, and its external scrutiny has been the greatest single contributor to one extremely important track of security sector reform, cleansing of compromising personnel from Serbian security sector ranks. Unfortunately, this is not enough. Only a fraction of the personnel in the Serbian security services who were involved in committing crimes in the 90s have been charged, much less convicted by the ICTY or domestic courts. The continuing presence of remaining perpetrators, their accomplices, commanders and allies in Serbian security sector units, including judiciary and other parts of the Serbian administration, in political and business life, in the poorly regulated private security sector, and in the media, significantly influences the overall political landscape within Serbia, including scope of the security sector reform and policies toward Kosovo and Bosnia and Russia. It is the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. I hope that setup of the Intergovernmental Commission for Facts about Victims of War Crimes and Other Crimes Against Humanity, RECOM, that is the coalition of civil society organizations throughout the region, that they lobby for, and the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies is an active member of this coalition, will also contribute to the cleansing process of the security sector ranks and to raising of awareness of importance of democratic control over the sector. Good news is that the European Commission and the EU have recognized RECOM as a benchmark useful for articulation of conditionality policy for Western Balkan countries in the future. In conclusion, despite all the above-mentioned open issues, or exactly because of them, if the situation in Kosovo does not deteriorate, Serbia should be given candidacy status. This will provide some support for genuine pro-EU forces within Serbia and preempt a drop in public support for the EU integration process in advance of the year 2012 general election in Serbia. The date of the EU negotiations should then be announced and organized as quickly as is feasible, but be firmly and clearly conditioned, hopefully with some issues I recommend here. Continued Serbian progress towards the EU membership, if predicated on the strengthening of institutions and regulatory bodies within Serbia, would weaken the principal opponents of the Serbian pro-EU agenda, Russia included. Unfortunately, another long presentation can be made about the Russian role in Serbia with very gloomy conclusions related to its impact on Serbia and further democratization and EU perspective. Those opponents are beneficiaries of the status quo, including lack control of the security services, often possess unregulated monopolies and influence current policies towards Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Further progress would both be a setback for them and provide a new set of tools for the genuine pro-EU forces and the EU itself to reduce or eliminate their influence. I am firmly convinced that the approach I have recommended, a combination of clear conditions and support for their fulfillment, would be in the mutual interest of both Serbia and the EU. A similar approach has delivered so far, significantly helping genuine pro-EU forces in Serbia in their support for the Serbia's bid for candidacy. It would also have a positive impact on the further democratization of the region of the Western Balkans that still needs stronger coordination and involvement of the EU, the United States and NATO. NATO has failed significantly in the region to be among main actors to promote and support overall political reforms as it was in the Eastern Europe. With the new democratic government in place next year, Serbia will most likely, hopefully, at least apply for individual partnership action plan that will be another good window of opportunity for comprehensive approach to completion of the security sector reform. Bearing in mind a very dynamic period in the Middle East and North Africa, I dare say that the EU needs a practical confirmation that it is evolving from a regional player to a global player. I sincerely hope its future involvement in the region of the Western Balkans, that is at the moment in a really dangerous and frustrating stalemate, at least when it comes to Macedonia and Bosnia, to a certain extent to Serbia, will prove that it has both the willingness and the capabilities to do so. Thank you for your attention. I hope that I have made a compelling case, at least as compelling as our Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Božidar Jelenic, made last week when he visited Warsaw, although I know that my arguments for the candidacy bid and my perception on the situation in Serbia are slightly differing from his. I'm looking for your eventual questions. Thank you.
It's interesting that conditionality and Russia as the elephant in the room could also be applied to Ukraine. And our next speaker is Borys Tarasyuk, former foreign minister, second former foreign minister on the panel. But obviously, as well as the conditionality in terms of the association agreement and the whole debate about the political opposition being imprisoned or charged, that's at the same time, on the one hand, there's the association agreement, but then there's the custom union talks with Russia. The floor is yours.
Before coming to covering the questions you posed, Mr. Chairman, and the subject matter of our panel, I cannot but come back to the two very important points of our previous panel. That is a stable governance and democracy. I cannot but transfer these two major points to the Eastern Partnership and to Ukraine in particular. Some 5 or 6 years ago, I was in Washington, and then Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld presented me with a photo of being made at night from the satellite, from the outer space of Korean Peninsula. And it was a very symbolic photo because it demonstrated what democracy is and what dictatorship is. Because there was a clear line between two parts of Korean Peninsula. One is being lit at night, where democracy does exist in the south of Korea, and another one dark, completely dark, North Korea. Only one spot lit, the Pyongyang capital. So this is a clear demonstration where democracy is, there is a prosperity, there is a stability, and vice versa. Another issue is stable governance. I remember when during democratic authorities in Ukraine came to power after Orange Revolution, after a couple of years of the governance by Democrats, everybody were furious about the quarrels, about the disputes between Viktor Yushchenko and Yulia Tymoshenko. And a lot of people in many European capitals were referring to this situation as instability. And I remember when the new president, Yanukovych, came to power, everybody were prompt to say, finally, the stability is established in Ukraine. And I disagreed spring last year that this stability is coming to Ukraine. So this has nothing to do with the stable governance, because the stability does exist in Northern Korea. But is it the stability European Union is looking as an example? Of course not. So I would like simply to say that stability should go hand in hand with democracy. There should be no division between stable governance and the democracy, and vice versa. Now about the subject of Eastern Partnership and the questions, Mr. Chairman, you posed to me. First of all, what is known as European neighborhood policy was not accepted by Ukraine as a right conceptual approach on the part of the European Union, because it put together in one basket the countries of Northern Africa, of Middle East, and such countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Caucasian countries. So it was a conceptually wrong approach. So the Eastern Partnership policy produced as a result of initiative of Poland and of Sweden was a step in the right direction. Is it working? From my standpoint, the person who is dealing with the European Union for around 20 years, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It is being declared, it is being proclaimed, it does exist on paper, but it doesn't work, because what some people are referring to as the actual success of Eastern Partnership is in fact the bilateral track between the European Union and a given Eastern partner. So this relates to Ukraine completely as well. So I do claim that Ukrainian approach was a correct one, because from the very beginning we didn't accept Eastern Partnership as the only track of cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union. We took it as a supplement to our direct bilateral relationship, and we were correct, because what was set in 2009 in the Eastern Partnership policy as an objective for all 6 countries, for all 6 partner countries, happened to be for Ukraine either long ago as being implemented or about to be implemented. So it doesn't relate to other 5 countries. I'm not talking about the Belarus. So this is my view on the Eastern Partnership and how it works. As to the Polish presidency, to be frank, I'm being impressed with the activity which is being demonstrated by the Polish presidency. Although we should understand that after Lisbon Treaty, the presidency has a diminished role, but nevertheless, a personalized approach, activity of a given diplomacy, Polish diplomacy, is demonstrating that even under the diminished powers of the presidency, it is possible to reach a result. Sometimes I'm being impressed that the Polish presidency is much more active than the Ukrainian authorities in trying to cope the problem which emerged as a result of the internal policy of Ukrainian current authorities. For example, very unusual, I would say, actions are being viewed. Last Wednesday, Foreign Minister Cieszkowski as well as Foreign Minister Bill visited not Kyiv, capital of Ukraine, but Donetsk, where the 2 teams, Donetsk Shakhtar and Porto of Portugal, were playing. And the single reason for them to go there to meet one of Ukrainian oligarch, Akhmetov. So this was unusual step to try to find a solution to the problem which was introduced as a result of Ukrainian authorities. Another step, another attempt, President Komorowski is going to visit Ukraine next Monday as well to try to do the best, to save the major thrust of Ukrainian-EU relationship. And so this is a clear demonstration that for Poland, it is a matter how the relationship between Ukraine and European Union are being developed. So what is needed? That Ukrainians themselves, and first of all Ukrainian authorities, stop attacking the values and standards on which the European Union is being based. Stop attacking Ukrainian opposition. So, Yulia Tymoshenko case and Yuri Lutsenko, these are just a personification of what is going on in Ukraine under the current authorities, the attack against democracy in general. And in such a way, one should make a judgment what to do with the association agreement, where Ukraine happened to be a pilot project for all other Eastern European partners. So the agreement is over, the political part and the DCFTA part is ready. So the authorities were keeping saying that during the forthcoming EU-Ukraine summit, which is to take place on 19th of December, this agreement will be initial. Now we hear another story, that the Ukrainian authorities did not expect the association agreement to be initial during the summit, and the whole problem of summit is being questioned now on the part of the European Union. So I am and will be Euro-romantic. But it doesn't equal that I'm urging the European Union to sign the initial association agreement under whatever circumstances, under whatever policy the Ukrainian authorities are carrying out. So business as usual on the part of the European Union will be seen in the Ukrainian society as though the European Union doesn't care about values and standards. It is being based. So to give the answer to your question, Mr. Chairman, we are in favor, I mean the opposition, we are in favor of initiating, signing, and entry into force of the association agreement as soon as possible, because this is the agreement not for Yanukovych. This is the agreement for the country and for the people, and not for Yanukovych. At the same time, we cannot but rely on the support from the European Union and democratic community as a whole to stop attacks against democracy in Ukraine and achievements we have achieved as a result of the victory of democracy in Ukraine during Orange Revolution. To finish with, I would like to say that much depends on us in Ukraine, whether we will have association agreement, whether Ukrainian authorities will comply with the commitments enshrined in this agreement. Of course, this is in the interest of Ukraine as a country, in the interest of Ukrainian as a citizen, but not by whatever price. To finish with, I would like to say a few words about cross-border cooperation, which Mr. Demidov referred to. A cross-border cooperation for Ukrainian citizens is not an abstract. This is the problem for millions of Ukrainians who were deprived of their right to visit freely neighboring countries, which they did before those countries entered the Schengen Agreement. So this is a real problem. You know, many of you in the European Union do not feel, many Ukrainians do feel that there is another wall constructed, invisible wall between the European Union and Ukraine. So the sooner the visa liberalization regime will be granted to millions of Ukrainians, the better for democracy in Europe, for Ukrainians, and for all other people in the Europe. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The whole issue of visa liberalisation will be having a panel this afternoon, but of course this is a similar point about Belarus. It's not just about the regime. If you want people to have access to democracy, you have to pull down the barriers. It's a difficult one because of the technical requirements which are set out by the Commission, but I think that this debate we have to have much more intensively on how to bring down those barriers, even if the government of the country is backsliding. And I think perhaps one thing I hope we can have by the end of the Polish EU Presidency is an action plan also for Georgia, as well as Ukraine and Moldova on visa liberalisation. But we still have about 30 minutes left, so I open the floor to questions. We'll take a few. Please say who you are and try and be fairly brief. There's one at the back first.
I'm Balázs with the International Center for Human Development, I think I'm from Armenia. It would be really a problem to miss this opportunity and not ask a question to Mr. Tarasyuk, who is also co-chair for Euronest. As the panel about Eastern Partnership and Enlargement finally, and perfectly your point was well taken, and I truly appreciate for that frank and open presentation. But can you also add about the situation with the Euronest? How that component of parties component or parliament component cooperation can really help to move sides closer? Because mainly what has been always missing between two kind of Europe and Eastern Partnership countries, it's cultural, and on that way also the political cultural integration process. All the projects with associated agreement or deepened free cooperation, they are much more technical, they will bring their part, but the political cooperation and political integration would be one of the main pillars for the real integration. I would truly appreciate your comments on that and what is the situation with Euronest.
There's some hands over there.
Excuse me?
Go by the way. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Jelena I'm Deputy Director of the International Renaissance Foundation. This is the Soros Foundation in Ukraine. And my question is to Mr. Polish and Mr. Cieszkowski, and it is about the deep and comprehensive free trade area. we mentioned it briefly here, for quite a lot of time in Ukraine we were looking at the DCFTA as an anchor for deep reforms which would be really pushing Ukraine forward, even if the membership perspective is nowhere to be seen. So now, as you mentioned, so the negotiations on the DCFTA is practically is complete, and because the signing of the association agreement is probably becoming now quite a distant prospect, I wonder if there is still a possibility to use some of the promise or some elements of the DCFTA in this interim period to keep Ukraine engaged, because engagement is a very important thing. I remember I know that there was this idea to split up the DCFTA from actually the association agreement, and I am glad it didn't happen, because still there needs to be some kind of a carrot, and the DCFTA is a carrot. I know that a lot of big Ukrainian business actually made their next 5-year plans calculating that there will be some DCFTA, so they are preparing for that. So I wonder, do you think there is some kind, I don't know what kind or way to use this DCFTA promise now, while we are waiting for the situation in Ukraine to improve dramatically and to get the situation which would enable the signing of the association agreement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Péter. I come from Georgia, and I represent a Georgian think tank called the European Initiative Academy, Tbilisi. I have a question concerning EAP as an instrument of supporting democracy, as it was, I think, rightly pointed out in the first panel, instead of promoting the democracy, and by that highlighting that it's more of an internal effort. But I'm a strong believer also that democratization of a particular country indeed has a very strong external dimension. And the 2 decades with this post-Soviet transition is a clear example, because depending on the efforts of external actors, particularly the EU and its conditionality, we have the different progress and trajectories of transition in these countries roughly in 3 clusters. Those who are the members or the candidates now, we have the group of the countries with kind of a quasi-systems with a still unfinished transition or democratization, and then you have countries who still keep up the facade of democracy, however they are more kind of consolidated authoritarians, and the progress is less expected. But my question here, and exactly stemming from that experience, is when we do not have a membership perspective clearly so known, the Eastern Partnership, like you rightly pointed out, there could be tailored some different tools and mechanisms how to make the rewards more encouraging for these countries to progress better down the road. And of course there is no naive expectation that there will be something different what we have now. We have clearly the aims to have deep economic and political integration, association agreement. We have certain instruments, tools and programs, but I think the very point here is how these instruments are coordinated, interplayed, and how consistent are the efforts to support these trends. My question now relates back to the fears back in my country and some other Eastern Partnership countries that this southern neighborhood would largely swamp the interest of the EU and switch resources back there, thus making EU efforts less consistent in the countries that we have. And the second component, very short, of the same question, democratization as a matter of security. So what are the visions of EU as an actor rendering security to the countries? I'm not talking about tanks and necessarily hard security means, even though, for instance, in Georgia we have the EU monitoring mission and the conflicts are there. But I think it cannot be ignored that democratization also needs to be secured against the very manifold risks that make it so fragile, starting from elite change to the conflicts on the ground. Thank you very much.
Okay, you can pass the microphone here to Jan in the front. Can you bring it here? I want to take quite a few more questions, but please keep them short, otherwise we won't get any answers.
Thank you very much. My name is Jan Piekło. I am the director of Polish Ukrainian Cooperation Foundation. I have two questions. One question is to Jelena Milić about Serbia and the attitude of the Serbian people towards the possible or prospective membership action plan, NATO membership action plan for Serbia, because we still remember that NATO bombed Belgrade, and what kind of change we can see in the Serbian society. I was in Belgrade a couple of months ago, and I saw that the change was, let us say, delicately limited in the attitude towards NATO. And the second question is about Ukraine to Mr. Tarasyuk, but also to our colleagues from the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to our Hungarian colleague. I have a feeling that the EU committed three big mistakes in dealing with Ukraine. First mistake was not giving the clear signal of prospective EU membership just after the Orange Revolution. The second mistake was committed in Bucharest. It was the NATO summit, and membership action plan wasn't granted to Ukraine and to Georgia at that time because of the opposition from Paris and Berlin in various ways. And the third mistake, the biggest mistake, was committed later. It was giving a credit of trust to Mr. Yanukovych, just at the very beginning, in spite of the signals from the Ukrainian civil society and also about the forced local elections in Ukraine. So basically, how it happened that Yanukovych got such a credit of trust from EU and from Poland as well? Thanks.
Thanks, Jelena from European Council on Foreign Relations, think tank. I'm glad that you mentioned Russia as one of the elephants in the room, and I wonder if participants would comment on how to engage Russia in the partnership. Quite an easy question. I mean, but realistically, what can we do? I mean, Germans tried to engage Russia on Transnistria. It doesn't seem to be a big progress. The moment EU said that there will be a DCFTA with Ukraine, Russia said back that they're going to close the market for Ukrainians. So the question really is, I'm running out of ideas. How can we engage Russia in this partnership?
A couple of hands over here.
I'm Marina Kravchuk, I'm LGI Fellow. At the same time, I represent Academy of Public Administration and civil society organization Ukrainian Alternative. I would like to ask, for example, in Ukraine we have now many new civil society movements, many new networks, and very often some protest movements, they lack analytical component. And think tanks sometimes are quite isolated from the needs of different groups in society. And how to deal with it? What is how PASOS or probably European Union can help to these new civil society organizations and new networks and think tanks to cooperate and to organize new forms of civil society activities in our countries.
Thanks, Marin, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Following up on the first question that was asked by our Armenian colleague, I would like to ask you, Mr. Tarasyuk, what is the situation with Belarus? We all know that the very launching of Euronest was delayed by the bone of contention of who would compose the delegation from Belarus. And we can also forecast that there won't be any democratic elections next spring or fall in Belarus. So does it mean that parliamentarians and potentially also the opposition will remain outside of this very important institution of the Eastern Partnership?
Just the last question.
Okay, so I'm Stojanovic, Belgrade Center for Security Policy. I have one question and a short comment. I want to say that I agree with most of the things that Jelena mentioned about security sector importance in our region, but disagree that it's worse than anywhere else in the region. But the point I would take from what she said is that the whole democratization agenda should not be stopped once the candidacy status is given. And that seems to be an EU approach these days. Once you are candidate status, we do not discuss the quality of democracy anymore. Your parliament must be functioning, oversight must be functioning, and so on. So I think the democratization agenda should stay on, even if the candidacy status is given, and even if the negotiations have started with any of the countries in the region. The other thing important for our region is that conditionality regarding security sector should not be there just to protect the fortress Europe, which was the case in previous enlargements, and it still seems to be the case in our enlargement too. The biggest focus is on border management, on organized crime, all the kind of things that give more competences to security forces and not that much democratizing domestic sector. But the third thing I want to highlight is that I agree with Mr. Balázs, and this is that EU really lacks awards and credibility. And I was thinking the other day, what's the perception in my country, and talking to friends, it seems that the debate pro-EU is to persuade people that it's worthwhile investing because it's an interest of their children. It's not in their lifetime that it's going to happen. So it's this debate between my lifetime and my kids' lifetime that this will happen. So how to keep EU on agenda if it is that long perspective? What kind of awards could be provided in regular, so to say, installments, of course not leaving out conditionality, if the perspective is so long? In this case, I think Western Balkans, although prospective members, are much more similar to European neighborhood policy countries than to previous enlargement. So membership does not look credible these days. So how to make it more credible with more of a short-term capacity, as Mr. Balázs mentioned.
Thanks very much. I'll ask each of the panelists to speak 2 or 3 minutes and answer questions, and we'll do the reverse order. So starting with Boris.
First question concerning Euronest Parliamentary Assembly, as well as the question posed on Belarus in this context. I would prepare rather not to answer the first question, because otherwise I have to say that because of 2 Eastern European partners, we failed to approve recommendations by the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly during our first regular session on 14th, 15th of September this year. Regretfully, due to the contradicting positions of Armenia and Azerbaijan, we faced from the very beginning, a constant fighting, and it looked like, very wrongly so, that Euronest Parliamentary Assembly is a forum where those 2 countries can resolve the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is a very false approach, and this approach forced us during the inaugural session of the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly in May this year to introduce a provision which in fact gives any participating country a veto right. And thus we introduced a time bomb under the whole structure of Euronest Parliamentary Assembly, which exploded at the very first session, because both countries in fact used this article in order to block the decision, the set of recommendations from the Parliamentary Assembly of Euronest to Euronest summit here in Warsaw. So I think that those 2 countries have to cease to rely their expectations on such structure as Euronest Parliamentary Assembly to resolve their bilateral conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh. As to Belarus issue was one of the issues which in fact delayed for 2 years the introduction of parliamentary dimension of Eastern Partnership. because there were hot debates among the members of representing European Parliament and national parliament of Eastern Partner countries. The parliamentarians from Eastern Partners were against a kind of sanctions against depriving the parliamentarians from Belarus to participate in this parliamentary dimension. Finally, we agreed that we will begin our work reserving seats, empty seats for Belarusian parliamentarians until the time when the European Parliament will be in the position to recognize that those elections are going to be fair and free. To be frank, I don't belong to those optimists who expect that the next elections in Belarus will produce a democratically elected parliament or the president. So unfortunately, this depends not only on European Union, on friends of Belarus and Belarusians, but it depends on Belarusian society as a whole and Belarusian opposition. So, and one question about addressed to me by Mr. Péter. This is about 3 mistakes the European Union has made. One of those mistakes was not EU originated, so this was NATO originated on Bucharest. Yeah, I fully agree that the European Union wrongly met Ukrainian democracy after the Orange Revolution and did not change its ill-fated concept of European neighborhood policy, so-called European neighborhood policy. So let us wonder what might have happened in case European Union will offer the perspective to Ukraine back in 2005. I think that we would not face the current situation in Ukraine with the backsliding of democracy. The Bucharest NATO summit what was a mistake on the part of NATO leaders, and instead of offering membership action plan to Ukraine and Georgia, they just stated that these countries will be in NATO. I fully agree with Jan Péter about the credit the European Union and Washington gave immediately after Viktor Yanukovych was elected. Even before it was declared officially that he is duly elected president of Ukraine, we heard statements. It was like a competition from Washington, Brussels and other capitals, who is going to be the first to congratulate Yanukovych, even taking into account that there was no officially proclaimed result of these elections. So I think that this instigated Yanukovych to attack democracy. It looks like he doesn't understand the sense of messages being sent to him from the European Union as such, in the form of resolutions of the European Parliament, including the recent one on 27th of October, and the recent visit of President of Lithuania, Grybauskaitė, who, on behalf of the European Union, sent a very clear and strong message. If you're not going to change your policy, you're not going to have summit, and you're not going to have association agreement. Thank you.
Thanks. Jelena.
Just to clear out something, Serbia is not applying for individual membership action plan, bearing in mind that we are officially a military neutral state. The maximum that we are looking for at the moment is a completion of a submission of the individual partnership action plan. As far as I know, the Ministry of Defense has completed its part of the work, and the application is now halted in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, mostly due to the recent developments in North Kosovo. About the public perception and support for NATO integration, let me tell you that I find it remarkably high, somewhere about 15%, bearing in mind the history of Serbia-NATO relation and bearing in mind that for more than 10 years of the beginning of the democratic change, we never ever had a positive in favor of NATO cooperation, not even to mention membership campaign in this country. In the other hand, we have very strong anti-NATO campaign, particularly when the new status of Kosovo became a topic of the international community, I think somewhere back in 2006 and 2007. And I think that this period it should be very useful for the Western partners to remember and to see who at that time was at least trying to cleanse Serbian public sphere from obvious lies that were spread by Serbian officials, some of them still in power, and which organizations at that time voiced at least reason and try to present at some facts, if no arguments in favor of NATO integration, but to correct some basic fallacies that were largely introduced into Serbian public sphere. Another reason why I think the situation of ABA relation is dubious is that NATO itself officially proclaims the policy in Serbia which focuses on the following. Let's forget about past 10 years is a long period enough, and let's focus on the future. Why? Does NATO have an ill conscience? How comes that the bombing and the status of Kosovo are so irrelevant in one hand and then so relevant for the Serbian future in the other hand? And the fact that 5 EU member states, most of them also NATO states, did not recognize Kosovo add to this staged invasion and give arguments to those even who are in favor of Serbian EU integration but not of Serbian NATO integration, that NATO did something wrong in '99. On the top of all of that, we have also a strange role of the United States, particularly in the defense reform in Serbia. The United States, the official politics is rather focused on personal relation and promises that individuals give, and they don't look that much into the mechanisms these promises are then delivered, whether they are on the personal authorities or on the political party ground, rather than on the strengthening of the institution that control defense sector and other security sectors in Serbia. And I think that this is the reason why we still never opened the issue of NATO integration as something that can contribute to the improvement of our political system and the values that we cherish, rather than just as a security need. And as I have already said, the Kosovo politics of Serbia overarches and limits all other policies in Serbia. Because of the current Kosovo policy, we never ever had a proper assessment of our security needs, security circumstances, and potential ways and partners how to address them. And I think that this is particularly affecting our rational argument and debate, public debate, whether we should join NATO or not. We have never came to this situation yet, and I think we should, and I think that we are losing momentum with countries already gathering and thinking how to contribute to further democratization and stabilization of the North Africa and Middle East. Luckily, there is this silent, not majority, but awareness among citizens in Serbia that this would be genuinely good thing for us, that we will end up in a family of well-developed and stable democracies, despite all the challenges they are facing throughout the world. And the recent polls that I mentioned today say that this coalition, Radical Change, is already evolving as the third political force in Serbia. And all of members of this coalition have been in favor for NATO integration for so long and in favor of the exchange of Kosovo politics. So even if this trend helps the leading Democratic Party to shift its politics, it is a benefit for Serbia. Let them have the credit for that. Doesn't matter. The idea is that there is how should I say, at least a force in Serbia pretty visible, and now nobody can say, why shouldn't you vote for them or support them because you threat to lose your voice if they fail to achieve 5% or more. These kind of arguments are out of hand these days, and I think that if we get a new pro-democratic government in the next composition, and if we at least make some kind of breakthrough in dialogue with Kosovo, that at least individual partnership action plan can be in place in spring next year. Hopefully that then we shall see for the future. And as to Sonia, I deeply apologize to all of you if you have managed to make an impression that my presentation about the security sector reform in Serbia leads to the conclusion that the security sector in Serbia is in much worse condition than anywhere else in Western Balkans. I did not say that by no means, but time constraints actually push me to focus on the gaps that we, through our work, have identified. And yes, these gaps are really heavily influencing some of the policies in Serbia, and I would not even advocate for the positive ruling of the European Commission and Council if I don't think that these gaps, along with the assistance of the EU, can be closed properly in the forthcoming future. When I mentioned progress in adoption of the laws required by the European Commission for the continuation of the Serbian EU integration, I did not go into details which these laws were, but let me tell you that among them are some very important for the improvement of democratic oversight, particularly in the role of the Parliament. Our MPs finally this year, thanks to the EU pressure, got their independency, and they don't have to give in advance blank resignations to their party leaders, and with the next composition of government we shall get two boards, two committees in the Parliament in charge for the democratic oversight of security structure, and with this new power of the MPs I hope that these things can be better improved in the future. Current situation is rather that Serbia is going through security sector reform from the bottom-up approach because of the ICT and because of the reconciliation and because predominantly of Kosovo. But we need some top-down approach stronger as well, and this is where my focus has been all these years. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start with Euronest because it was really difficult to us preparing the Warsaw summit. We were very upset that the parliamentarians were not able to negotiate successfully a document for the Warsaw summit, and it was a few days before. And happily, we've managed during the Warsaw summit to have a Warsaw declaration adopted by all the participants, including Armenia and Azerbaijan. So we've passed this problem in Warsaw, but I hope as well as Minister Tarasyuk that it will be followed in all the forums. Second, on the CFTA that Ms. Bidurska asked, what are the prospects? I think that EU procedure is that nothing is negotiated unless everything is negotiated, even in the internal affairs of the European Union and in the external affairs as well. So I can't agree more with you that splitting of association agreement and the CFTA would be a disastrous decision. So I'm happy that we haven't even considered it, because it would be disastrous not only for the EU-Ukraine bilateral relations, but it would be very disastrous for the whole European Union Eastern policy, including with Russia, with Central Asia countries, and Eastern Partnership countries, of course. On the three mistakes that Director Péter stated, I think that prospect of membership is the most difficult question in the European Union, and I think that I'm sure that we haven't received the prospect of membership signing the association agreement in 1994. So I think I ask always to look at the problem of the EU external actors, especially Eastern partners, relations from the perspective not only of the EU political will, but as well look if the country deserves this political, this strong political signal, and if there is a will to integrate with some political and in this case military body as NATO. We know that the Ukrainian part was not ready for this process if we are talking on NATO. And I don't know if there was a credit of trust to Yanukovych, but I think that every country has and every nation has its democratic right to elect their leaders. And what was the crucial point at that time, that elections were, generally speaking, democratic. And I remember that during our integration process with the European Union, there were some changes. I remember in 1993, changes to the left side, post-communist, and nobody stopped the integration process or talking on association agreement and so on. 97, 2001. So there were never reactions on the relations with the EU based on political nature of the government elected by the people. So I think that was the basis of continuation and even speeding up of the negotiations with Ukraine after election of Yanukovych, and it was decision of Yanukovych to speed up the negotiations with the EU. Thank you very much.
Start with the free trade. Of course, technically, it's quite possible to detach the trade chapter from an association agreement. Even more so when free trade has already been negotiated with all the very sensitive technical issues like rules of origin, competition rules, safeguards, which are the big traps in the free trade agreement. If the whole association agreement has been settled and signed, this is a crucial moment, then the ratification of the agreement and the immediate implementation of the free trade provisions can be separated from each other. This happened with our countries back in 1992. Because trade is EU competence and the whole association agreement needs ratification in the member state parliament, not trade.
After signing the whole?
Yes, of course, after having the whole balance. So this is the ideal move. Of course, any other solution. I've seen many things in the EU. In the EU, everything is possible if the member states want so. We have always found the legal provisions when the political will is strong enough, but the best thing is to have the whole association agreement completed. Democracy. We have to insist on democracy in the Eastern partner countries, but please do not buy democracy. So for me, it's not only distasteful, but also counterproductive to offer money for democracy. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Democracy is a political achievement. It's very difficult because this is not like the free trade. Free trade is a mutual benefit
for the two parts, so it can be implemented with an ugly partner. I'm sorry for this word, but I would like to make it very clear. Democracy is a conflictual problem, because you are asking the partner something they don't want to do by themselves. So this is a clear conflict. Human rights issues, raising on bilateral negotiation, this is always a conflictual. You can exert the pressure. You can function some other tools like economic tools, but this is a complex machinery, not offering money for be good and that you will be paid. Ukraine. I think that it's an idea about membership. Nobody can deny EU membership once we have the provision in the basic treaty. For the moment, Article 49, every student knows it that all European states can apply. This is valid for all Eastern partners. Now, whether we find an occasion to reconfirm that provision, which is valid, this is a political question. We found an occasion for the Western Balkans in 2003 to repeat it, to send that message in order to encourage them to make efforts. I think that with the Eastern partners, the situation is not yet right for such a message. Things are still moving. But maybe one day we can find a moment sending a message, a solemn declaration, a meeting, a high-level opportunity to say that you could be EU members if this is not new. They know by themselves, because if they read the treaty, it's there. But to give a political emphasis on that, it would come. Bucharest, NATO. It was very clear that after a promising restart of the NATO-Russia Council, nobody wanted to provoke Russia with NATO enlargement issues. So it was a rather clear situation. First, this is always the Russia first issue, which comes up from time to time. Stability would better be served if Russia is cooperating with NATO. And then let's see the rest afterwards. Yanukovych. I had the pleasure to be received by Yushchenko in Kiev when he was president, and then later on by Yanukovych. I could see with my own eyes the difference between the two gentlemen and the two drives. In foreign policy, you should have a very clear difference between an upper layer, which is communication and action with any government, and a fundamental attitude to the country, because governments are coming and going. Politicians even more. Countries are there. So there should always be a very wise and calm consideration. What is attaching us to Ukraine, to the people, to the country, to the economy, and what does that government deserve from our side? How frequent meetings? What tone of speaking with each other? How many pictures in the newspapers, and so on? How many invitations? There should be a clear difference. Elections were accepted by the international community, so why not to speak with them? Then let's find the very exact way of speaking and the frequency of meeting. Finally, a last word about Russia. How to engage Russia. We cannot ignore Russia. Even in the Eastern Partnership, which was a rather clear step to do something pushing Russia in the background, not with Russia. Okay, it has been done, the message was sent. Let's put Russia on the map, because Russia is on the map. And let's not increase the conflictual situation, because it is not good for the Eastern partners either. There are things where we have to go into confrontation with Russia, but there are things where we can go towards cooperation. For me, such an example could be, for instance, transport. Trans-European transport is a peaceful issue. To take quite a different example, when we are speaking about the accession of Turkey, there are big discussions in the room. When I speak about extending railways to Turkey, everybody is smiling. So no controversial issues. We have very important interests to extend trans-European networks, for instance, transport networks, to the eastern neighbors, first of all, to offer much more than we do today, and then to trace the lines further in Russia, because there is real economic attachment with Russia. We need that transport as well. We could do on rails much quicker than navigating around the whole globe from China to Polish seaboard. So let's not forget Russia, and there are a few other issues where we could show Russia that if you are cooperating with us and we include our common neighborhood, this is good for you as well.
Thanks very much. I'm glad as well as Russia on the map. I think all the other countries discussed were not countries on the map about 22 years ago. So we can see some progress. I think every question was answered, apart from perhaps the one about the civil society being more effective. I hope we can discuss that at the PASOS conference. So I'm sure everybody's hungry. Thanks very much to the panel. Thanks for so many questions. Enjoy lunch.